Welcome to Making Our Way Forward, a podcast where we share compelling life stories and learn from the experience of everyday entrepreneurs. At NACCE, we celebrate diversity and invite you to join the conversation as we talk to entrepreneurs and leaders from all walks of life. We hope that by telling their stories, we bring you inspiration, empower you to take action, and ignite entrepreneurship in your community.
Hi, I'm Jeff Smith, your host for today's episode. I'm Director of Equity and Innovation with NACCE. So today we'll be talking about how to create the culture of care in a community, how to tackle some sensitive issues, and how to address equity and diversity in underserved communities. With me in the studio, we have Dr. Angela Long. The reason I've asked her here today is to tell us about her experience in Tallahassee Community College and beyond. She is also the author of a groundbreaking book entitled Overcoming Educational Racism in Community College, involving higher education's top researchers, practitioners, and community college leaders to address educational disparities that exist among students of color. So for our listeners, we will have some special bonuses that we will announce at the end, so stay with us to the end. So welcome, Dr. Long. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And I honestly, it's such an honor to be a part of this podcast. I'm thrilled. And I always love talking with you. And I'm so excited for the work that you're doing. And also at NACCE, we couldn't have a better time, I think, to have these conversations. So thank you for the opportunity.
Certainly. So Dr. Long, I have a question that I believe at least some people are really interested in knowing. So as I stated, you've written a book entitled Overcoming Educational Racism in Community College. So some people might assume that with the focus of your book that you might be a person of color, but you're not. So why did you engage this work, and what motivated you and what inspired you to write this book?
Well, that is a phenomenal question, a loaded question, obviously. And so if I'm going to tell my story, I have to say I have to go all the way back to my first experience. When I left high school, actually, while I was in high school, I didn't want to go to college right away, believe it or not. And in my mind, I told my parents it's grade 13. And I was just convinced, I'm going to get a job and I'll eventually head to the college, but just not right away. Well, I have an older brother who's very smart, very advanced. And my goodness, before he was even a senior, he was out and about doing dual enrollment, graduated very early on and went straight through. And my story kind of shifted, I would say. I was a good student, but, more average and just trying to figure out my path and my purpose. And so basically one day, one of my English faculty professors said to me in the high school, he said, Angela, I think you should apply for a competition in journalism at the local community college. And what it was a skills competition. And they were going to bus in thousands of students. I'm from the West Coast, so this is in very rural Oregon. And I signed up. I thought, well, it's a day away from school, right? You get to go with your friends and drive to this campus and get an experience. So I was very excited. And what happened to me is I went in and I did this journalism competition. Well, during lunch, I asked, well, who had won? And lo and behold, they said, well, somebody by the name of Angela Long. And I have to tell you, Jeff, I was like, what? This community college, Umpqua Community College, it actually paid for my first term of college. And so I had to go. And my parents were thrilled. My dad said, if you don't go, you're going to get a job, you'll get a car, and you may never go. And so here was my ticket to entering into that environment. But here's the thing, when you talk to people about community colleges, sometimes when you're a student, you're a little embarrassed and you say, well, I'm not going to the university. So there's a perception. And when I entered that experience, I have to tell you, it changed my life. And it was one of those things I knew I was being put on a path. Not quite at the time understanding what my future held. Obviously, we don't know the future, but I loved it. I got a 4.0. I got involved in multiple different venues to be engaged as a student. But this is really where my love for community colleges started. So now let's fast forward. As I went straight through during that time, I said, okay, I want to go into education. People had said, oh, you'll be a great nurse. I even wanted to be a talk show host at one point and to mimic Oprah Winfrey when I was a child. Excuse me, but I knew then that I had a calling, and I think you and I have talked about this. Many of us, we have to try to figure out our purpose, right? And what is our meaning and our purpose in life? Because I believe every person alive has a destiny. I believe every person alive was birthed for a reason and for such a time as this. And so little did I know at the time my story and where that would emerge, but I made a decision very young that I wanted to go into education. And the reason why is I said, I want to make a difference. And I remember as a child being in class with, all the kids, and the teacher says, okay, turn to page 46 in your workbook. And I learned very easily how to find the right wording and fit it into the right, script, but really not comprehending sometimes what I was learning. So something in me said, you can make a change. Well, Jeff, I ended up going straight through becoming certified as an elementary school teacher. I went straight through school. I got my AA in education, then my Bachelor of Arts in elementary education. And I kept going. Scholarships opened up and got my master's in school counseling. But here's what's amazing. At 24, I was given an opportunity to enter a postdoctoral program, a doctoral program, post-secondary education, and it was in community college leadership. And I was 24, like I said, at the time, and I was admitted, but the stipulation was, Angela, you need to go and work at a community college, even though I had been a student, to get more experience, because I needed a little bit more. So here's where my journey began, Jeff. I started teaching classes to help students that were wanting to get their GEDs. And I was an examiner for GED students to be tested, and worked in the advising center. I have a high school diploma, never thought about it. But what I started seeing was this: amazing people walking through the door of all demographics, of all ages, socioeconomic backgrounds, trying to find their way in life, right? And they had dropped out of high school. And one day, the vice president of student services came to me and she said, Angela, you have a lot of passion. Would you do me a favor? I said, well, of course. And she said, I would like for you to track the number of students coming through and finding out how many actually stay and complete. Now, the reason, Jeff, she asked this to me was because we had a scholarship program, and it was actually very remarkable. Every student who had come to us to be tested for the GED, and if they passed, they had a first semester free ride, books, tuition, everything covered. Remarkable program. Well, this is what I found out. Out of 365 students, half dropped out within the first 2 weeks. Of the remaining half, the second half dropped out within that next semester. After 2 years, only 11 went on to complete an AA degree. Well, it bothered me. And I said, why is this happening? I don't understand. Here's this reward we were giving, supposedly, this carrot to bring them in, but something was keeping them away. And they didn't feel that they belonged. And so I called up several other community colleges, and guess what? Same story. To go ahead, long story short, I ended up doing my dissertation on this topic. And I worked with the director of longitudinal studies at the National Center for Education and Statistics in Washington, D.C. He sat on my committee, and he gave me access to the data nationally. And what I found was the same story. We were losing over half of these students within the get-go. But for those who persisted, they typically were very non-traditional females, parents. But the ones that did persist actually had higher GPAs than high school diploma holders. Well, Jeff, that kind of launched my mission to say, okay, what's going on in our system? And I found through the process, 50% of all students attending a community college, even today, drop out. And we are losing human capital within our communities that are amazing resources. These are intelligent people. They just don't have the right tools and the right fit to say that they belong. And so that's where my work with equity really launched. I do have a very long story, so I won't get into it. But as I began to do more and more research, I started looking at the numbers. And when you look at students of color in our country, you will see that literally 70% of all students of color drop out within their first year to community college. 70%. That's not okay. That's a travesty. Of those who graduate, Jeff, only 10 to 12% go on to graduate from college. And I also looked into poverty because this is a very key topic as well in our country, especially today. If you look at a student in poverty, even a poor white, only 20% go on to graduate from college. And so that's what prompted really so here's the thing, you mentioned the book. The first book I published was called America's Forgotten Student Population.
Wow.
And it focused on students with GEDs because 1 in 7 Americans has a GED, but we really don't talk about them. The next book came about, and in between, you have to understand, I was teaching college, I moved to Florida, I graduated with my doctoral degree, and I had this data in hand. And I started working for Santa Fe College in Gainesville, Florida. They became an Aspen winner, as you know. And I worked with the student government, and we actually developed a program and presented it, believe it or not, before the Undersecretary of Education, Dr. Martha Cantor. She was so impressed. Our president said, I'm going to fund this program. Well, that really got me into the world of, we began to present. I had invitations to present before White House staff and attend, select meetings focused on educational excellence for Hispanics. But the burning desire in my heart, I felt a higher calling that I had work to do, even though I may not look like a poster girl for some of this conversation. I do know this, every person, like I said, has potential. And so the book on race, and eventually I met Dr. Corbin and I met you. We did a third book together, but that second book, Overcoming Educational Racism in the Community College, after my first book, I knew I had to do this second book. And I began to meet with leaders across the country. And we were looking at the data. And it wasn't my opinion. I said, what are you seeing right now? So we actually published a book, 5 sections focused on these 5 demographics, right? We focused on Black students. We focused on Hispanic students. We focused on American Indian. Often they're not talked about. They're very overlooked. We looked at Asian and Pacific Islander. 40% of Asian and Pacific Islanders leave community college and drop out. Most people don't know that. And then we looked at poor whites. And so I'll say this, that book, what came from it, we had national researchers, and I'm talking top of the line, sharing their research. We had voices of national leaders. This was their day-to-day passion that they would focus on and study. And then we focused on 5 community colleges in America that really were trying to turn that needle around, right? Looking at equity gaps. So when that was published in 2016, it really helped prepare this platform to look at success factors, which I developed a 6-factor theory, and also just began to meet with the right people to say, how do we redesign the education system in America?
Wow.
Here, let you ask the next question.
No, that's awesome, Dr. Long. One of the things that we're really focused on here at NACCE is what we call everyday entrepreneurs, and people who find a challenge and who finds a problem, and they have that passion enough to seek to try to solve it. And so I think you are certainly a great example of that. And so I would ask you, and we've been thinking about this in terms of after the pandemic, we know that some of the things have been further exposed, some of the inequities. There's a lot of social unrest. There's political division. And so we know that this is a time where there's need for leadership for the healing of our nation and our communities. And so we want to speak to people like you who have saw a challenge, a problem, has taken it upon themselves to address it. And so with that said, I want to ask you, through this journey, what have you learned personally? What have you learned about yourself that you might want to share with the audience about yourself that might be helpful to someone else who sees a problem in their community, in their sphere of influence, and they want to go and make a difference as well?
Thank you for that question. I will start with this. I think often we look at our lives and we say, well, who am I? What can I contribute? And I have to tell you, it was actually my dad. He said to me one day, because a lot of things came my way very young. And often I would question, am I ready for this? Even starting teaching as young as I did at a college setting, People, sometimes they look at you and they question you, right? But my father, he always said to me, don't ever underestimate who you are and the impact you could have. And he said, it only takes one person to change a system, to change a nation. And so for good or bad, right? So I think each of us has the ability to be a mouthpiece for good or for bad. And for me personally, I think that's why I love NACCE so much. And I love this understanding of an entrepreneurial mindset, because entrepreneurial thinking, it really challenges people to look at the world from a problem-solving aspect. I can look at my community and I can say, okay, what are the needs of this community and how do I address it? I think we all have to get past this point to say, well, who am I? Like, who's going to listen to me? Well, why not? I mean, listen, the worst thing that can happen to any one of us is that if I knock on that door, that somebody shuts the door. Okay, so they say no, that's okay. It wasn't meant to be. Then guess what? Another door is going to open. So my whole concept, I really want to encourage people to knock on doors. Don't underestimate who you are, your calling, find your passion, because now is the time. Now is the time. And so I will say, you mentioned some of the things that I had done, and I shared with you kind of my backstory. I currently, as you shared, work here at Tallahassee Community College. And speaking of entrepreneurial mindset, I think for me, this has been such a profound journey. Because after I published that second book, I went to work for the chancellor of the Florida college system. And Florida is a great place. I mean, in terms of education, we're ranked #1 in America. We've got multiple Aspen Prize winners, at least in the top 10, if not top 150. And so I feel very honored to be here, working here in this state. Well, at the state, as I said, I worked for the chancellor. I collected best practices, focusing on access and affordability and student success achievement, right? And attainment, looking at our completion numbers. But when I had opportunity, Jeff, to kind of switch gears after I'd done all the research and I had published and taught, I came here, and I'm going to tell you why. The opportunity was given. And by the way, that's how I met Dr. Corbin with that third book that I didn't author, but Community Colleges as Incubators of Innovation. But I helped with the series. And so what your listeners probably don't know is on the side, I'm a co-editor of a national book series called Community Colleges, or Innovative Ideas for Community Colleges. So this was the second book in that series. But here where I sit right now, while I'm talking to you, is in Tallahassee, Florida. And Tallahassee Community College, I came here for a very direct purpose. I was invited to take part in some opportunities. We actually sit here in the poorest zip code in the state of Florida. Our student demographic is over 44% Pell eligible, especially since the pandemic. We are 52% non-white. And Jeff, I have to tell you, I've been here since August of 2019. My first week on the job, I was asked to help co-facilitate with faculty a design thinking kind of brainstorming workshop, okay? And we pulled together almost 200 faculty and staff. Why did we do it? Because we looked at the data. The college at the time was saying, okay, we got a 30% equity gap between our Black and white student achievement. And we actually gathered these individuals to say, if you could redesign the student experience at Tallahassee Community College, what would that look like? And Jeff, again, I'm very honored and privileged. I was able to take all of the input, and I'm talking hundreds upon hundreds of sticky notes. They were put into teams. They all developed prototypes. But when it was all said and done, for 2 weeks, we had a team sitting in our conference room, and we literally mapped out all the ideas and we clustered them into themes. And you know what happened? We were able to look at all of the identified barriers that these individuals were seeing on this campus, from poverty to even perceived bias. We went there. We talked about it all. Then we asked them, okay, if you could overcome these barriers to help students overcome, what would that look like? What are the strategies? And so they developed strategies, they identified it. Well, Jeff, what came out of that, and it actually tied in very well to the work I've done, was this CARE initiative. And CARE stands for Connections, Academics, Resources, and Engagement. And that initiative literally launched where in the last year and a half, we have not only met with our students to ask them the same questions. And by the way, students have told us The faculty and staff know who we are. They know our struggles. We have a homelessness issue here, poverty, like I mentioned. But what came of it, these factors and these success initiatives, we were able to look at our math pathways because math can be a barrier. And we asked the tough questions. And you know what? The faculty said, okay, let's rethink our math pathways. We did a redesign effort with the Dana Center. We then redesigned our TCC honors program. Then we looked at TCC online. Next week, we're going to focus on faculty and their faculty to student engagement model and redesigning that. Jeff, this initial care initiative has literally exploded in a good way. But here's what's amazing. When the pandemic hit, as we all have experienced it's been almost a year now, from last spring break, actually, it hit right during our spring break. Overnight, we were tested. All the work that had been done with that care initiative was literally put to the test. And here's what's remarkable. We all sat down and said, okay, this is not a problem. This is an opportunity. So what do we need to learn from this experience? Again, what does that go back to? Entrepreneurial mindset, right? It's things as a hindrance, but an opportunity. And I say this, here's my bottle of water. Somebody invented this. Somebody said we have a need for this, or even the cap. Look at a paper clip. Somebody said, I need to design a paper clip. Well, that's the thinking. It's putting things into place that fit the need at the time. And so I'll let you ask your next question, but I will end with this on this point. That whole work that was done during the pandemic, we started these TCC live courses because we said our students, most of them do not do well with an asynchronous class format. And so we knew that many of our students that needed face-to-face also needed that engagement interaction time. So we actually launched a 2-week training with our faculty called When a Pandemic Strikes. We talked to them about how to utilize Zoom and virtual platform to engage students at the highest level. We partnered with the Association of College and University Educators with Achieving the Dream and really partnered with the right groups, right, to have this conversation. Well, Jeff, I have to tell you, it's very exciting because we just got our fall data back. We launched, I said let me explain, live courses were learning interactively in a virtual environment. Those courses were offered synchronously. So for most of our students, if they had a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class from 9 to 10, they could still meet with that instructor and their classmates at that same day and time, except on Zoom, right? And so they were live courses. We surveyed the students and they said, we love this. We literally told our students 2 things in my research, I will say, we found is this. Number 1, students who do not succeed do not have a sense of belonging, okay? Number 2, and that's a wealth of things we could get into. Number 2, the ones who don't know how to succeed, it's because they've not been given the tools to succeed and they don't know how to navigate the system. And when you come from a family and a background where nobody in your family's been to college and you don't know the hidden rules, now's our job to teach them, here's the tools. So guess what we did, Jeff? We helped personalize that student experience through the care model, where if I go to Chick-fil-A or I go to Starbucks, what happens? They say, oh, Jeff, Angela, what would you like with your coffee? They write your name on the cup, right?
Right.
It's not individualized learning, it's personalized. That's what we did here. We built up this model to tell our students, number 1, you are a name, not a number. Number 2, we're going to help build your academic pathway according to your strengths, your interests, and your values. So we partnered with super strong Myers-Briggs company. Then we told them, you belong. You're now part of our TCC family. We're the Eagles. You belong here. And we work with families. We work with churches. We talk with people to say, this is your home. This is a great first start. You're going to save money. We're going to launch you to get you transferred. And if you need to get out in the workforce, we're going to help you do that. So Jeff, I'll close on this. Our data came back in the fall. And I'm happy to share more with any of your listeners because it's really profound what we're seeing. But from all of the work done through student services, virtual support services, and through our teaching and learning framework and workforce, our demographics, student demographics in terms of the success rates went up across the board. Our Black achievement went up of all first-time in college students by 9%, all first-time in college students by 9%. Campus-wide 3% for those who had been here combined, but our Black student achievement went up by almost 6%. Our Hispanic student achievement went up by about 5.5%. But across the board, we saw the numbers, international students, something has happened, it's changing, and it's because we asked the tough questions. We're not finished, but we are in the top 10 for Aspen Prize, so we'll see what happens with that. But yeah.
Wow, Dr. Long, this is so amazing. Gather so much from what you said, and I think our listeners have as well. I just want to kind of recap a little bit. One of the things I heard you say is to believe that you can make a difference and don't be afraid to use your voice. Another thing that really stuck out to me is to understand the situation. So you have dedicated your life to knowing and understanding this data. And so you have dug in and you have examined the problem from all different sides, perspectives, so on and so forth. And then the next thing, you were able to bring together a community to help address and to solve this problem. I think this is so profound for the everyday entrepreneurs who are seeking to try to find ways to find solutions to these problems, and you've demonstrated that with your work with the care model. So I would love to ask you another question about that in terms of what are your hopes and dreams for this work. So I know your work at the community college and the surrounding community. What is your hope for this work beyond? Because as we've kind of launched our new book, we're talking about 50 states to 50 nations. So we're looking at it from, this kind of global perspective. So I know you're a dreamer and you're a visionary. So what is your dream? What would you like to see happen? Where would you like to see this work go?
Well, that is a powerful question. And I'm going to answer that question. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, obviously, the amazing team. I've just been a portion of this plan, right? But our president was on board from day one. Our former provost, who is now the president of Miami-Dade College, Madeline Pumariega, a lot of it, she was a catalyst for the change. Our current provost, Dr. Calandra Stringer, I can think of multiple people, Sherry Rowland, our vice president of student services. We literally had, Jeff, and I will say through this work, it was not siloed. In order to affect change, you need people to have the same vision. And I'm going to say, here's a lesson learned for me. People need to have ownership to move forward in a process. And so this entire movement, it took the right people in the right room at the right time. And I know this change, sometimes it comes through crisis. We don't like change, but when a crisis hits, it forces you to change. And sometimes it's for the better, right? So I will say that this whole movement, there was not one siloed group. Student affairs and academic affairs, workforce departments, they didn't say, oh no, we're doing this on our own. It was everybody on board, right? With the right leadership at the right time. So you asked me a very profound question. What do I envision? So Jeff, I'm glad you asked that, because I'm going to say this. I am very bold, and definitely a visionary in the sense that I believe, each of us, like I said, has a calling. And I know in my heart, I've been called to something. And I don't think we can ever look at our lives or even how we might come across to people and say, well, I don't fit with that. Don't ever say that, because you might be called to very unlikely situations and you may not think that you're the poster person to be a voice for that, but you might be exactly what is needed. And that's why, because you don't fit the perfect mold, right? So my vision, what is on my heart, and I believe this truly, I believe we have an opportunity to change education nationally. What do I mean by that? I think when you look at our system of education right now, there are broken pieces. As a matter of fact, part of my research, it launched itself out of a 2012 report that the American Association of Community Colleges put out called Reclaiming the American Dream. And Dr. Walter Bumpus, who's the current AACC president, he actually wrote the foreword to my last book, but he led that project. This is before I got into my work, but this was I would say the foundation of really getting into that study. But in the report, this is what's interesting, Jeff. At that time, they had leaders across the country that gathered, and they were asking tough questions because they saw these completion numbers. They're not good. And with students of color, it's not okay. Something's not adding up. So what is it? So they asked the questions and said, okay, what do we do? Well, Jeff, it was a little shocking because the recommendations that came out said pretty much throw it all out except for open access. Now, a lot of people would say, I don't know if we're willing to do that, but the 3 recommendations was we need to reset, we need to redesign our system and reimagine, right? And so I am of the belief that when you look at somebody who comes to a college, and let's say they come out of a background where they may not feel like they fit, but they're very intelligent, bright people, right? Those individuals, when they come to us, I always say community colleges are the Ellis Island of higher education. I didn't make that statement up, but I think it's a powerful one. And so when somebody comes to us with a hope in their heart and a dream, and they take out loans, but they don't quite understand or have financial literacy, it can be detrimental. And if they take certain classes, they don't know their pathway. You know, right now you look at the trends and you know what you see is you see an average student takes 6 years to get a 2-year degree. Well, my goodness, who has time for that? Most of our students, especially students of color, they're working. They're trying to put food on the table. And so we need to really say, why are we doing what we're doing? For what purpose? Why is this structure set up? It's an industrial model, you know, like you were raised from 8 to 9, you have math, from 9 to 10, you have reading. It's compartmentalized. But guess what? The world doesn't work like that. The world is interdisciplinary. So I think when you ask me this very deep level question, I would love to see some of the work that we're doing here in Florida, and at this college, and the research I've looked at. I want to work with the right people to ask the tough questions, to begin that redesign process. And I would love to see something emerge for this country where our students that come to us, some of them want to get in and get out. They want to get a job. Because I can tell you, if we're not willing to ask the tough questions and come up with solutions, well, guess what? Amazon, Google, some of these big companies, they're already training people on the spot right out of high school, giving them certifications. But we are the workforce engines of America. And so community colleges have a unique opportunity, I think, to listen to the right voices. We need to be talking with these companies, but we also need to be reinventing ourselves and looking at the pathways, and talking with families and telling the students, you have so much potential. Let's take your strengths, your interests, your values. What are you good at? Find that first, and now we're going to match you up to the right job. So I hope to actually launch a next book on the future of work and learning. I've already begun the process of talking with amazing leaders across the country, entrepreneurs, and it's not just community colleges, Jeff, it's really K through 12, K to gray, you know, is what they say.
Yeah.
So that's what I hope to accomplish, is to get on that path of getting the right people in the conversation and helping disseminate that information to begin a change to save lives and generations, and to break through the cycles that we're seeing in our communities.
Wow, Dr. Long, that is so inspirational. Thank you so much for sharing your story as a young woman seeking to find her voice, and then doing the work to understand the problem, and then being bold enough to pursue it with just this relentless passion that you have. It is such an inspiration. I think a lot of our listeners are going to be inspired as they think through the problems that they're facing and the potential that they have to be the solution that they seek. And so we really, really appreciate you. So as we promised, for those of you who stayed until the end of the episode, you have the opportunity to receive Dr. Angela Long's book. Email me at smith@nacce.com. And the first 3 people who do that, you will certainly get a copy. And we will continue this conversation with our next guest, Calandra Stringer, Provost and VP of Academic Affairs at TCC. So stay tuned, and we will see you soon. Thank you, Dr. Long.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that listening to this podcast will help you to explore the many ways we might define entrepreneurship. Join us every other Wednesday for more episodes as we celebrate opportunity, learn from one another, and grow together. Subscribe to this podcast, connect with us on social media, and learn more about today's speakers at nacce.com/podcast. We look forward to making our way forward together with you.